Hey there, it's Anne from Lolli and Grace, and I wanted to come do this quick video tutorial to show you a technique that I would have to say, while it's not as fun or as flashy as a new stitch or fancy threads, it's the technique that probably had the biggest impact on the quality of my stitching as far as the accuracy of the stitches and my enjoyment of stitching, and I'll explain that in just a minute. And that is, the technique is to wrap the inner hoop with cotton twill tape. And the reason you do this is so that your fabric will stay stretched absolutely as tight as it can be stretched and stay that way the whole time you're stitching. So here's a hoop this was just a test hoop I was doing for some like a previous video tutorial, and you can see that the inner hoop is not wrapped, and I have stretched this fabric very tightly. But as you are stitching, whether you hand hold or put it in a stand, you can see that this fabric, I like my fabric to be super tight. If you've heard any of my videos, you know that about me. But as you stitch, you can see that if you push on it, that the fabric starts to loosen. You see those wrinkles right there and the wrinkles on the edge? That is very problematic as you're stitching. Your stitches will not be as accurate. Your stitching will pucker your fabric will pucker in between the stitches, and it's just not very pleasant. I used to stitch this way all the time, and every 5-10 minutes I would be tugging on whatever section I was working on. I had to stop, tug on the fabric. It was just an endless thing I had to do. Once I started wrapping the inner hoop with the twill tape, I rarely ever have to stretch, re-stretch, pull on those puckers on my fabric again. It stays nice and tight. My stitches are accurate. It doesn't pucker. Much better situation and much more enjoyable to stitch. So here's how to do it. Obviously, take the two hoops apart, put the outside hoop aside, and then you're going to be wrapping at an angle. This is, as I mentioned, cotton twill tape. This is 1/2 inch because this is a smaller-ish hoop. This is a 6-inch hoop. If on my 8-inch hoops or a 9-inch hoop, you could use a 1-inch wide cotton twill tape. But for this smaller size hoop, the 1 inch is better. You do want to use, I like cotton. I've heard people use grosgrain ribbon, or you can buy bias tape, or sometimes it's called twill, but it's a polyester, and that's not ideal because what you need is a little bit of thickness that this provides, and you need the sort of a little bit of a grip. A polyester ribbon or something like that is going to be a little bit slick, and the point is once it's wrapped, you want the inner and outer hoop to squeeze the fabric. You don't want that fabric to be slipping on a slippery ribbon or something like that. So that's why you want to use the cotton twill tape. Wrap at an angle. So I'm going to sort of decide my angle, make sure that it's an angle that I can wrap so that it stays flat, so the edges are butted up next to each other, so that's a good angle. So once I've found that angle here on the back, on the inside of the hoop, I've got my cool melt glue gun over here warmed up. It's a little bit tricky. I'm going to try to hold that angle in place, flip that back, put a tiny bit of glue. Don't need a lot. So stick that down, make sure it's cool enough to stay. And I've pre-wrapped a little bit of the twill tape here. So now all I have to do is, let me trim that first. Get my scissors. Where are they? Hopefully you can see this. I'm just going to trim that off so it's not in the way. Like that. All right, so now I can start wrapping. Now that the beginning is glued, I can just make sure I'm going at a good angle. I'm going to wrap really super tightly. All right, and I'm just going to go around and around and around. I want to make sure, as I mentioned before, that the edges of the tape are sitting next to each other and they lay flat. That's important on this side. The inside, not as important because there's no fabric. But this is the edge that's going to be up next to the outside hoop, like this. And so it's important, can you see that? It's important for that, this side, to be smooth. You do not really want to wrap it so that the edges, if you can see this, see how those edges are overlapping? I mean, I guess you could, as long as you were consistent with the thickness that that's going to make it thicker, which is not necessarily a problem, but it's a little bit uneven. So I like to do it so that everything is flat. So it takes a little bit of hand strength. I'm going to go around and around and around at the same angle, pulling as I go, making sure that's flat. Go all the way around. So let me do that really quickly, and I can show you what it looks like when I get to the end of it. Okay, so I've wrapped all the way around and I'm at the end. And sometimes I get lucky, and when I get to here, I have exactly the right width to make this lay flat. But I've come up a little bit short here. You can see that it's a little bit too narrow right here to have this part lay smoothly. Can you see how it's kind of laying on top of the twill tape on either side? So what I do in that case is I go back and I spend a little bit of time kind of ooching. Get this out of the way so you can see what I'm talking about. I spend a little bit of time moving all of this, the wraps that I've already done, just moving them a little bit, as much as it's kind of hard because it's really tight. Sometimes I can get it to work. Maybe I'll start back here and I'll just try to get it. Sometimes I have to unwrap a little bit, and in fact I may have to do that just a few to go back and just try to move that tape away. There it goes. I just needed a little tiny bit more space. So I'm going to go back I unwrapped maybe, I don't know, 2 inches. I'm going to try again. Keep your fingers crossed when I get to this end here that it will fit. Let's see. Oh, I actually probably made it worse. Now I really don't have space. So I'm going to go fiddle with it a little bit and see if I can get to where I have just the right amount of space left to make this last one fit. So let me go try to do that. Okay, so that took a little bit of wrangling. Usually I get really lucky and it just turns out to be the perfect width, but this time I had to fiddle with it quite a bit to make sure that that last space is just right to lay that across there. You know, if there's a little bit of space, it's not that big of a deal. You just don't want a big, huge gap. So now that I've come to the end, I can come on the back and do the same thing that I did at the beginning, and I'm just going to trim it off. Right now I'm just going to give it a rough trim. Can move that, and now I can do the same thing and use my Cool Melt glue gun. A little bit of glue, pull that tightly. Let it set for just a minute. You can see I have a little bit of space, but that's all right. So once that has set up, I can now trim that edge. And now it's all ready for me to use to stitch. And my fabric, you'll need to loosen the screw a little bit because now it's thicker underneath there. But once you put your fabric in, it will remain very tight in the hoop as you're stitching. And I do want to point out that you can tell on this one on the inside I had some space. That's probably what maybe caused my troubles there at the end. But that doesn't matter. It's not, like I said, it's not this inside that is important. It is the outside that's important, that you want to be flat and smooth. All right, so that is my best, one of my most helpful things I've ever done for my stitching, and hopefully you'll give it a try too, and you can stop tugging on that fabric as you're stitching and it will stay nice and tight. All right, thanks everyone.